So diversity and inclusion install a totalitarian system of thought in which we have to hire the party to micromanage every single thing for us. It is a world in which adult human beings, to say nothing of children, cannot be possibly trusted to talk about identity-related issues or even be in the vicinity of one another across identities, and have to be micromanaged by administrative busybodies who love to go to bureaucratic meetings when you don't, and they can install the policy there. So that's diversity and inclusion. Now we can turn to equity. Equity is not as big of a lie as these other two. Equity kind of tells you what it is. It sounds like a nice word, but if you actually just look up social equity theory, which they've dropped the social, so you can't look too easily, it means, whereas equality, this is pretty close to a quote, whereas equality means that citizens A and B have equal shares, equity means adjusting the shares so that citizens A and B are made equal. It's equality of outcome, enforced equality of outcome. So in practice, it's going to involve racial quotas, other identity quotas. We see this in practice in California, which has had a law for a little while saying we have to have a female CEO in every company of a certain size. Now that you have to have a racial minority on every C-suite. Sorry, I said CEO. It's on the C-suite of every big company. You now have to have a woman and at least one racial or sexual minority. And this will expand. Quotas are the thing. This is racial quotas and sex quotas and other quotas. It is to enforce equal outcomes. Those equal outcomes are going to be assessed, though, because they have to make up for the cruelties and oppressions of history, the unfairness of history. They will be enforced rather generously in certain directions and rather tightly in others. So in other words, it will be something like affirmative action combined with reparations without ever having to use either word, so they can keep using those words for other things at the same time. Equity doesn't mean equality. Equity means forcing equal outcomes artificially. We've tried this experiment as a society again and again and again and again, and it doesn't work. It never works. It undermines trust in our institutions at the very least. It places people who would be better qualified in certain sectors and in the wrong sectors because they have to meet certain quotas. So rather than helping people flourish to the best of their ability where they would flourish to the best of their ability, you have to stick them like puzzle pieces into places where sometimes it works out great and sometimes they don't belong. And meanwhile, making everything fit this preconceived notion. And so you look at this very, very, even still in a probably very friendly way, you say, oh, well, I don't think that's a great idea, but it doesn't matter under an understanding of systemic racism. By the way, systemic racism means inequity is there. Racial inequity exists. If there are inequities, there must be systemic racism. They're identical concepts, the opposite pieces of one another. And so you think, well, maybe that's fine. Well, if you look at it under a systemic understanding, any cause must be racism. So even if it's a statistical fluctuation, even if the entire applicant pool was pulled through and you couldn't find, and you hired every even minimally qualified person to fill your different boxes, whatever those happen to be, that's still racism. So you see this a lot in organizations. I know it happens in some churches where the most dangerous place to be is close to woke, because they're bending over backwards to make this happen, and they're the ones who get hit the hardest, saying you're not trying hard enough, because they're the ones who are showing that they're going to make that effort. Equity is not equality. Equity probably will not work in any case whatsoever. But when you have this systemic understanding of equity, even random fluctuations would be considered racist. Just that many applicants this year. And it was a totally random stochastic error. Sorry, I'm a mathematician. It happens. Doesn't matter. Just natural variance in the numbers would be enough. So you have to understand then the equity, the point is to undo by artificial means systemic inequality, systemic racism, systemic power. It is the tool to unmake the effects of systemic power, believing that if we just have them unmade, that everything's okay. Diversity and inclusion are the tools that are believed by magic, kind of like with the seizing the means of economic production. Here we seize the means of, I guess, bureaucratic production, but also cultural production. If we just get everybody believing diversity and inclusion, then equity will follow probably, and if it doesn't, we'll adjust the numbers with quotas and things, and everything will come out just fine. This is why you see the Proposition 16 in California right now on the ballot to remove the anti-discrimination language from their state constitution. It is in line with equity. That's the purpose. So we're going to discriminate to get equity. This is what Ibram Kendi, another best-selling author that's peddling this stuff for tens of thousands of dollars a pop now, keeps saying. He says that if anti-discrimination produces inequity, then it's racist. If discrimination produces equity, then it's anti-racist. So we need discrimination, just like Mike said. Now, I don't want to drag this out. You've got an idea now of A, how to analyze these things, and B, what these words, diversity, equity, inclusion, that I'm supposed to talk about mean in practice. The goal I had is for you to be able to understand them and to be able to start doing this analysis for yourself, so you stop getting played. The words don't mean what you think they mean. You have to say, how would somebody who obsesses about systemic power all the time mean this word? You have to do that, or you're going to miss it every single time. That said, I do want to say that this is, like all such movements, in a sense I kind of began with Marx. We saw the attempts to force Marxism with that, on the other side of the gulag joke I made. You end up having to start applying force. You end up having to start doing things that are distinctly illiberal, distinctly anti-liberty, anti-freedom, as I said, totalitarian, in order to enforce this. And we're starting to see very openly this kind of agitation. We've seen, for example, in the past, to echo what Mike had said earlier, we can say the very postmodern thing. We've seen people say, oh, we no longer have to worry about true theories and false theories, what was the exact wording? We need strategic theories. We no longer have to worry about true theories or false theories, just strategic theories. And now this has progressed far beyond that to where the strategic theories, people are seeing through them, and force becomes necessary. So you have to force segregate spaces. You have to force diversity quotas. You have to force equity. You have to force people to believe, act, and do according to the ideology, or you cancel them. Whiteness is property, so we can burn down a target. Whiteness is property is straight out of critical race theory. Therefore, we can seize it. We can seize that property for ourselves. You want a scary one? We think that the Constitution protects us in all things. We have the Fourth Amendment against illegal search and seizure. We should all acknowledge at the beginning of every meeting that we live on stolen land. Your land was stolen. Your property was stolen in the first place. It's not a violation of the Fourth Amendment to seize stolen property. This ideology subverts the contract that's there. It changes the meanings of the words according to its obsession with systemic power, and it plays us over and over again. And it is turning violent as that is starting to be seen not to work. I actually want to read, because I wasn't going to do this, and it's not quite where I want to wrap up, but I want to read to you something, and pardon me if I push some buttons or whatever. Michael talked about being able to take you to places where men stood for what they believed and were burned. This is from, I forgot what this person's, I didn't have a chance to look it up on the spot, again, what this person's role is, but this is somebody who has administrative or bureaucratic power in some capacity, I assure you. And she wrote, I'm assuming something in schools, because she wrote educators. At the beginning, this is a tweet she put out the other day on a few months ago. Educators, what are you burning? Your white-centered curriculum? The Amy Cooper next door? If you don't remember who Amy Cooper is, she's the one that was with, she was in the New York City Central Park, and she had her dog and the bird watcher, and she was accused of racism for saying she was going to call the cops over this altercation they had. The Amy Cooper next door, what are you burning? That's the question. The Amy Cooper next door, your anti-black behavior policies, the school's racist policies, your racist-ass principal, the funding for the police in schools versus counselors, what are you burning? Two of the things she listed are people. Two of the things she listed are people. What are you burning? This isn't just some random fringe wacko on Twitter. We have a situation now where, as Michael pointed out, I didn't tell you the story, the 2 + 2 = 5, we'll spare that, where they're denying objective truth explicitly for the purpose of saying that objectivity is neither possible nor desirable, to the point where they will deny 2 + 2 = 4 and make a fight about it. Michael mentioned various people, and he kind of asked me to nod, that quoted this. The Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health promoted that idea, that 2 + 2 can in fact equal 5, and people who say it equals 4 are wrong. The Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health promoted this idea and shared an article to that effect, which you can look up, that was written in Popular Mechanics. Good luck with those are not going to be very popular mechanics. I don't think. So to kind of wrap up then, a year ago this weekend, Michael also referenced that we gave a talk in London that was a year ago this weekend. And I talked about how the point of the woke thing is to enact a social and cultural revolution. It is, unlike Marx, who wanted to seize the means of economic production, it is a goal to seize the means of cultural production and flip over society. And they have done this very well. They've seized many of our institutions, academia, education. They're deeply encroaching into faith. They've got media. They've got their hands on the levers of power in politics. We see states like California. We see whatever's going on with the police doing essentially not being allowed to do anything to deal with the riots in Seattle and Portland, among other places. They have a lot of that power now. And so a year ago, I stood up and I said, they want a revolution. We have to fight. And then I said that we're late to this fight. That was the last thing I said. We're late to this fight. That was a year ago. We are later. I'll stop there. Thank you.
I call the next item of business the debate on motion 22004 in the name of Christina McKelvey on showing solidarity with anti-racism. I invite those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now, and I call on the Minister to speak to and move the motion. Minister, 13 minutes.
We have an overall vision for race equality in Scotland that by 2030 Scotland is a place where people are healthier, happier and treated with respect, and where opportunities, wealth and, more importantly, power are spread more equally.
Institutional racism and structural inequality exist in Scotland, and we need to recognise it, highlight it and commit to address it on a continuing basis.
Engaging in empty gesturing about racism ends up being performative and a quiet way to continue systematic racism.
It had so many tools to address othering behaviours that we all have, unconscious bias, for young children, for older children.
Most of us will be familiar with Angela Davis's words. In a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist. Well, I would question whether even that is enough.
I'm angry that in 2020 we're still dealing with overt racism, with subtle racism, with institutional racism, with structural racism. Whichever form it takes, it is still racism.
It's the concept of institutional racism, that racism isn't just something that is perpetrated by people, it is perpetrated by organisations through their practice, through their culture.
That will involve difficult conversations, listening, acting, and in some cases, just being quiet and stepping aside to let the voices that we find so easy to ignore speak their truth.
It's time for white people to change their behaviour, to say what they're going to change, rather than continually confronting black people. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that's been left reflecting on how best that we can show solidarity with those fighting against this injustice, and how we can use what they term as our white privilege to help.
Well, that's not terribly encouraging, is it? It really makes it sound like the Scottish Parliament is being controlled by social justice warriors.
So let us all act together. Black lives matter.
Our history and our national wealth are steeped in the blood of the slave trade. That rage felt by protesters towards the public memorialisation of slave trader Edward Colston in Bristol might just as easily have been felt here in Edinburgh towards Henry Dundas.
As I said, this is going to take over everything, and at the moment it's taking over Scotland.
I don't think we can pull down every statue, or change every street name, or tear down every town hall or townhouse that philanthropy built, brick by brick, from the proceeds of trade and exploitation, whether it was tea or tobacco or spices or slaves.
The fact that a third of Jamaican plantations were owned by Scots, that the wealth accumulated through the 18th and 19th century surrounds us all, the Georgian grandeur to which we all associate a degree of pride, whether it's in the new town in Edinburgh or the West End in Glasgow, should really be a mark of shame.
That's what we do in Scotland. We face our gritty and dark past in the same way we face darkness today. Whether it's Edinburgh's new town or the mansions that litter the Clyde, these are physical embodiments of the Scottish Enlightenment, but they also serve as reminders of the grotesque history of the wealth on which they were built.
It's right that our children learn that for almost 100 years, one-third of colonial governors were Scottish, that Scotland sent disproportionately large numbers to fight British colonial wars.
But what's the point of emphasising that Scottish history is really just evil, and any of the good stuff is actually tainted because of the evil that also existed at the time? Why would you do this? Well, the answer is, of course, because you want to emphasise that Scotland now is a bad country. And that means that Scottish people living now are bad people. And you know what kind of people they are, don't you? That's right, they're racists.
That our privilege is at the expense of the rights and opportunities denied to others because we live in an unequal and unfair society.
But anyone watching in horror from 4,000 miles away and thinking that Scotland is not racist, anyone thinking that our institutions and structures, that our Scottish society is fair and equal, would be wrong.
Was the systemic institutional racism, the racism born of privilege and unconscious bias, that hurt them the most.
Some of those structural inequalities that are built into Scotland today.
Because it's critical that people understand the legacy of slavery, the legacy of racism that surrounds us all, the wealth that it accumulated, and how that has perpetuated inequality and injustice in society, and Scotland in particular, today.
But speaking of the people of Scotland, what exactly is the solution? The final solution to the racism question? From the social justice warriors running the Scottish Parliament, what is it that they want to see done? Who are we going to be pointing the finger at as the guilty party for having done all of this cruelty, malevolence and injustice to people of colour?
The most senior positions in Scotland are filled almost exclusively by those who are white. Take my portfolio alone. The Lord President, white. The Lord Justice Clerk, white. Every High Court judge, white. The Lord Advocate, white. The Solicitor General, white. The Chief Constable, white. Every Deputy Chief Constable, white. Every Assistant Chief Constable, white. The Head of the Law Society, white. The Head of the Faculty of Advocates, white. Every prison governor, white. And not just justice. The Chief Medical Officer, white. The Chief Nursing Officer, white. The Chief Veterinary Officer, white. The Chief Social Work Advisor, white. Almost every trade union in this country headed by people who are white. In the Scottish Government, every Director General is white. Every chair of every public body is white.
I'm starting to think this guy just really doesn't like white people. The way he's saying white, and he's not the only one who did this.
Every chief executive of every council and every government department, white. Every director of a department in Scotland, white. Every principal of a college or university in Scotland, white. Every head teacher in Scotland, white. Every chair of a public sector body in Scotland, white. Every High Court judge in Scotland, white. Every prison governor in Scotland, white. Every editor of a news organisation in Scotland, white. Why?
The answer is, of course, because Scotland is 98% white. It is 2% non-white, and of that, 1% is black. That's why there is a massive lack of apparent representation in the Scottish Parliament, because it is almost entirely white people in Scotland. There is just a dearth of non-white people to recruit into the ranks and push up the echelons.
Is it because we don't have the talent? Is it because we don't have the ability? Or is it because that the opportunity doesn't exist? Or worse yet, is it because people don't think they're wanted or they're not welcome?
You've got Scots everywhere running Scotland. It's almost like it's almost entirely Scottish. What is going on here? It must be racism. But okay, it can't be that bad. There are some Conservatives in the Scottish Parliament. They must have something to say, something that counteracts this ridiculous narrative of Scotland being essentially a slave state.
Presiding Officer, let's be clear. Racism pervades our society, and it is a learned behaviour. People are not born racist. It is absorbed from the society in which we live.
I'd like to thank the Minister for bringing forward this debate today and agree wholeheartedly with the motion before us. I would hope we all share the deep concern and horror so many feel about continued racial injustice across the world, and that we all stand in solidarity with those calling for change. That we all recognise at this time of global pandemic that we must be cognizant of public health issues, and that we recognise too the responsibility on all of us to identify and dismantle the barriers of structural racism which still exist in our society. I don't have that lived experience, so I would rather listen to those who do and to their suggestions for what next, what practical and, if necessary, legislative changes will make things better, rather than charge in here in all my whiteness with some 10-point plan. Like I say, I haven't got the lived experience of black and ethnic minority Scots who've experienced prejudice, hate and discrimination, and I will listen and be led by those who do in what practical changes can be enacted to move us forward.
That is everything given to the social justice narrative about Scotland. Everything they could ask for. Scotland is racist, it's institutionally racist, it's full of racist people, it's irredeemable. They're not even going to take leadership. They're going to listen to whoever it is that they're listening to, who will tell them what to do. So there you go, folks. It looks like Scotland has been completely conquered by the social justice warriors. And now Scotland just seems to have no alternative to social justice. The Conservatives are doing it, the SNP are doing it, Labour are doing it, the Lib Dems are doing it, assuming they even exist in that country anymore. It's all social justice in Scottish politics from here on out. Scotland is bad, Scottish history is bad, the Scots are probably uniquely evil in some way, they'll be found to be so, because they require them to be so, but it'll be all bad, everything's tainted, and they'll be coming for you. And of course, because my channel has been demonetised, I have to let you know that we have a Spreadshirt store, and I think the Diversity is Strength t-shirts are the most appropriate now, because even in a country where it's only 2% diverse, it's still our strength. I'll see you in the next video.